Why good people turn into monsters. When morality turns dark, what if the people you once trusted the kindest, most moral, most loving suddenly turned into something unrecognizable? This isn't just a story about others, it's about you. In this video, we explore how good people can slowly fall into darkness, not from malice, but from roles, silence, obedience, and unexamined wounds. Through the lens of psychology, Zimbardo's Lucifer effect, Milgram's obedience studies, and Carl Jung's shadow, we reveal the terrifying truth: the boundary between good and evil runs through every human heart. But this isn't a message of despair. It's a mirror of awareness. With courage, empathy, and self-reflection, we can resist the subtle slide toward moral compromise and become protectors of our inner light. Stay with us. This journey will not be easy, but if you're ready to face your shadow, you might just find the part of you that's worth saving. When goodness can turn into darkness, have you ever looked at someone who used to be kind, only to be shocked by the realization that they're no longer themselves? Someone you trusted, someone who once lived with compassion, suddenly becomes someone who hurts others, perhaps even cruelly. The real question isn't just, why did they change? But something deeper and far more unsettling. Could I become like them? Today's story is not meant to accuse or condemn. It's meant to look deeper into something most of us avoid. The line between good and evil is not always clear. Some people weren't born bad. They were once good. They once helped, loved, and believed in what's right. But then, something happened, an event, a pressure, a role, and they began to change. When we think of those who do evil, we often separate them from us. But the painful truth is this: those who have committed the greatest atrocities were, at times, simply ordinary people. That doesn't mean all of us will walk that path, but it does mean this: every one of us has the potential to fall into darkness if we aren't clearly aware of what's inside us. This isn't just a story about other people. It's a mirror reflecting ourselves. And the question isn't, can good people become bad? It's, what within me is silently shaping my actions, my beliefs, and my choices each day? The answer won't be comfortable, but if you're not brave enough to face it, you may discover something more important than being right or wrong: the truth of who you are and the possibility to heal before it's too late. When circumstances create monsters, the Lucifer effect and a terrifying experiment, there's a popular assumption: bad people do bad things because they're inherently bad. But what if the truth isn't so simple? What if it's circumstance, not character, that pushes a good person into the dark? Psychologist Philip Zimbardo introduced a groundbreaking concept: the Lucifer effect, named after the fallen angel in biblical lore. Zimbardo posed a disturbing question: what causes ordinary people with no violent history, no evident malice, to commit acts of cruelty when placed in certain situations? To answer it, he conducted one of the most infamous psychological experiments of the 20th century, the Stanford Prison Experiment. A group of college students was randomly assigned roles guards and prisoners in a simulated prison. Everyone knew it was just role-playing. But within days, something horrific occurred. The guards began acting aggressively, punishing and humiliating others. The prisoners fell into anxiety, depression, and psychological collapse. No one ordered them to behave this way. There was no reward for cruelty. They were merely acting out the roles the environment had assigned. The experiment had to be stopped prematurely due to the overwhelming psychological damage, and it left us with a profound lesson. When people are placed in the wrong environment, given the wrong roles, and lack clear moral boundaries, they can become the worst versions of themselves. This isn't just theory or a lab case. It happens every day in society, in workplaces, in families, and even within ourselves. when a system rewards indifference, when a community stays silent in the face of wrongdoing, when roles strip away humanity, darkness can begin to grow. The question is no longer, I'm a good person, could I be corrupted? But rather, is the environment I live in slowly killing the good in me? And if so, will I wait for someone else to change it? Or will I be the one to redraw the boundary between myself and the darkness? Orders from authority. When morality collapses under power, if someone in authority told you to do something immoral, would you have the courage to refuse? It sounds simple, but in reality, it's far more complex and far more terrifying. In the 1960s, psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted a series of experiments whose results shocked the world. Participants were asked to play the role of teacher and deliver increasingly powerful electric shocks to a student every time they gave a wrong answer. The student was actually an actor, and the shocks weren't real, but the participants didn't know that. Despite the students screaming, pleading, and eventually falling silent, many teachers continued following the experimenters' instructions. Why? Because a man in a lab coat, a symbol of authority, told them to keep going. Milgram concluded, humans have a deep tendency to obey authority, even when it violates their personal conscience. And most people don't realize that this obedience is not forced. It's willing conformity to social patterns deeply embedded in our subconscious. Now be honest with yourself. How many times have you stayed silent in front of an unethical demand just because it came from your boss? How often have you followed the crowd, even when your heart disagreed? How many times have you told yourself, it's not my place, and let the wrong go unchallenged? Obedience doesn't always look like violence. Sometimes it's just silence in the face of injustice. It's nodding when you should have shaken your head. It's one overlooked wrongdoing. That becomes a habit. The question here isn't whether you're a bad person. It's, do you know who or what is controlling you? And more importantly, are you willing to take responsibility for what you didn't stop just because someone told you to obey? Not everyone is Hitler, but every time we stay silent in the face of wrongdoing because someone above said so, we contribute to the growth of darkness. And eventually, it won't just swallow others, it will swallow the humanity within ourselves. When we no longer see humanity in each other, the instinct to dehumanize, what allows a person to torture another without feeling guilt? How can an ordinary human casually strip away someone's life, dignity, or self-worth as if it were nothing? The answer lies in a dangerous psychological mechanism, dehumanization. When you no longer see others as people, but as objects, statistics, enemies, or garbage, any cruel behavior becomes easily justified. In war, the enemy is no longer a father, a son, or a wife. They become savages, vermin to be exterminated. In society, the poor are called leeches, the vulnerable seen as burdens. When we label others, we strip away their humanity, and once humanity is gone, compassion disappears with it. It's not limited to war or politics. Dehumanization creeps into everyday life through social media, workplaces, even families. When you call someone useless, stupid, or that kind of person, you're withdrawing their personhood and giving yourself permission to treat them badly. Think back to times you witnessed cruelty. The perpetrator may not have acted out of sheer evil, but from a sense that the other was no longer worthy of respect as a human being. Psychology calls this the loss of connection to the other's personal identity. When someone's presence is reduced to a symbol, a group, a label, a stereotype, hurting them doesn't feel real anymore. That's the fertile ground where indifference grows. But just as we dehumanize others, we can rehumanize them with a glance, a genuine conversation, A moment of realization. They are just like us. They feel pain, fear, exhaustion, and hope. And when you truly see the human in someone else, even for a moment, you are also saving the humanity within yourself. Because dehumanization doesn't just destroy lives out there, it numbs your heart in here. When you no longer see the human in others, you are slowly losing yourself, social roles, and the loss of self. Are you truly being yourself, or are you living out a role society expects of you? This may sound like a philosophical question, but it holds one of the deepest truths about how people behave when caught between good and evil. In the Stanford Prison Experiment, the most shocking part wasn't just the cruelty of the guards, it was how quickly their psychology transformed within days. Ordinary students with no violent history fully embodied their roles. They weren't pretending, they became guards with power in hand. And silence from the system they imposed. Humiliated, manipulated, and they failed to notice one thing: they had lost themselves. This raises a haunting question. In the roles we play, daily manager, employee, parent, child, are we unconsciously merging with our role when we cling too tightly to expectations, images, and authority? We risk losing inner freedom. We act from a script, not from conscience. In everyday life, this unfolds subtly. A strict father may strike his child not out of cruelty, but because a father must discipline. An employee may stay silent about injustice because their role is to obey. A teacher pressures students under the belief that it's my duty to guide them. But here's the truth: a role should never be bigger than our humanity. When we let titles, functions, or expectations swallow us, we lose the capacity to choose what is right, and we fall into behavior driven by mechanism, not awareness. We cannot live without roles, but we must realize a role is something we wear, not something that defines our being. You may be a doctor, a police officer, a teacher, a manager, but before all that, you are human. And being human means asking yourself, does this action pull me away from my true self? Each time you ask that question, you're calling yourself home, back to the truth within, where roles no longer eclipse your heart, and where compassion has the chance to breathe again. In a world full of performances, the one who dares to be real is the bravest of all. The silent compromises that lead to the abyss. Not everyone falls into the abyss in a single plunge. Many slip gradually, step by step, through small concessions, quiet compliance, and silent moments when they should have spoken up. And then one day, they look back and realize they are far from where they once stood. Moral decline rarely begins with grand decisions. It starts with something seemingly normal: a little lie, a turned blind eye, a wrongdoing not directly committed, just quietly tolerated, and then once more and again, until, before they know it, they are no longer the person they used to be. Psychology calls this the slippery slope effect. When we allow ourselves to cross a minor line, we begin to blur our inner moral boundaries. The next time our threshold is higher, conscience protests, less doubt fades, replaced by rationalizations like, everyone does it, just this once. It's not that serious. But the real danger lies not in the behavior, but in the numbing of our inner world. We no longer feel pain when we see wrong, no longer feel burdened when we overlook injustice. We think we are adapting, but in truth, we are trading parts of our humanity to survive in a toxic environment. Have you ever found yourself facing a decision, knowing it's wrong, but remaining silent for the sake of peace? Have you ever compromised on something that, 5 years ago, would have outraged you? If so, don't rush to blame yourself, but Don't ignore the signal either, because that might be the last whisper from your conscience before you stop hearing it altogether. The road to the abyss is not paved with malice, but with indifference. Little by little. So what's needed is not perfection, but the courage to pause when you feel yourself beginning to slip. Anyone can change course if they are clear-headed enough to realize they've drifted, and sometimes the bravest act isn't a grand gesture, but a quiet no, even when everyone else is silent. The darkness within you and within us all, we grow up with a simple belief: good people don't do bad things. But according to psychoanalyst Carl Jung, that belief can actually make us dangerous not to others first, but to ourselves. Jung called it the shadow, the unconscious, hidden part of every human being. It's not just the flaws we dislike, but the urges, anger, envy, wounds, and desires we refuse to face. We are not evil, but we have the potential for evil. If this shadow remains unseen and unintegrated, have you ever been shocked by your own rage, found yourself behaving like someone completely different in a moment of emotional loss? That is your shadow. And the irony is, the more you deny it, the stronger it grows. The more you think, I could never do something like that, the more likely you are to do exactly that when the right conditions appear, without understanding why. History is filled with people who began with noble ideals, only to become the worst versions of themselves, not because they changed overnight, but because they never believed they could go astray. The conviction, I'm not like, that made them blind to their inner transformation until it was too late. Jung never called us to be perfect. He called us to have the courage to face the shadow so that it does not control us. Because what we repress comes back in more twisted forms: violence, manipulation, victimization of others, or self-destruction. But when we face it, the shadow no longer threatens us. It becomes a key to inner freedom, a place where raw strength, honest emotion, and our unfiltered human nature reside. Thus, the truly strong person is not the one who always shines, but the one who walks into the dark, carrying the light of awareness, and returns with a whole heart, not to destroy the shadow, but to understand it, hold it, and walk with it consciously. When reason masks guilt, the most dangerous defense mechanism, not all acts of cruelty begin with a wicked heart. Sometimes, they come from a mind that has been trained to avoid guilt. Psychologist Albert Bandura called this mechanism moral disengagement. It is the process by which people use reasoning, argument, or psychological defense to convince themselves that what they're doing isn't wrong, even though deep down, they know it is. You've probably heard phrases like, "Everyone does it. If I don't, someone else will. It's just a small thing. It's for a greater good." These are not accidental. They are the language costumes our rational mind wears to shield us from the bite of conscience. A student cheats and thinks, "Everyone copies. The system is unfair. Don't blame the student." An employee treats a colleague unfairly, telling themselves, "If I don't push, someone else will." A manager lays off workers unjustly, claiming it's for the good of the company. Each time we do this, we widen the gap between action and morality. We don't need to feel guilty because we've already justified it. The problem is, the more we repeat this, the weaker our moral radar becomes, like new shoes that hurt at first. But over time, we stop feeling the pain. The same happens psychologically the more we avoid guilt. The harder it becomes to recognize when we're straying from our core values. But not everyone falls into this spiral if they practice a precious habit. Self-inquiry. Ask yourself, am I justifying, or do I truly believe this is right? If someone I love were treated this way, would I accept it? Am I avoiding guilt because it's too uncomfortable? Don't fear guilt in healthy doses. It's a moral compass. What's truly dangerous is not when you feel guilty, but when you do something wrong and feel nothing. Moral awakening isn't about being flawless. It's about facing your wrongs without fleeing behind logic, without covering your ears with excuses. That's the first step back toward the person you know you want to be. Awareness, empathy, courage, the three shields of the soul. If darkness can slip into our minds through circumstance, power, roles, and self-justification, how do we hold on to ourselves amid that storm? The answer doesn't lie in perfection or absolute virtue. It lies in three qualities we can cultivate and strengthen each day: awareness, empathy, and moral courage. Awareness is the ability to observe yourself in even the smallest actions, not to judge, but to make sure you don't lose yourself without realizing it. It's when you ask, "Why am I doing this? Is something inside guiding me unconsciously?" The aware person is not one who never errs, but one who pauses in the flow of habit to see whether they're betraying their values. Empathy connects us to the humanity in others. It is the strongest weapon against dehumanization. When you truly see fear, sorrow, and the longing to be seen in someone's eyes, it becomes hard to harm them. Empathy doesn't come from the mind, but from a heart that has known pain, failure, and vulnerability. And in that way, it becomes a bridge back to our shared humanity when the world grows cold. Moral courage is the third and perhaps most vital element, especially when action is required. Amid pressure, courage is not always grand. Sometimes it's just saying no to wrongness in a room full of nods. It's not laughing when someone is humiliated. It's not staying silent just to protect your image. But these three traits don't appear on their own. They must be trained like inner muscles, nourished by reflection, real experience, and living among communities with sound values. Most importantly, they require commitment, a vow to yourself. I will not let circumstances turn me into someone I no longer recognize. Remember, the world does not need more clever, powerful, or perfect people. What this world desperately needs are those who know how to pause, feel, and have the courage to choose what's right, even if they must stand alone. That is how you protect not only others, but the best part of yourself. When the guide can also lead you astray throughout human history, few things have shaped collective morality as powerfully as leadership. A single call to action can awaken compassion or ignite brutality within a crowd, and the danger is we often don't realize where we're being led until it's too late. Leaders, like Hitler, never killed anyone with their own hands, but through words, propaganda, and the manipulation of fear and hatred, he made millions believe that cruelty was righteousness. In contrast, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and Mandela stood before crowds equally angry, but led them with light. So what makes the difference? Not eloquence, but the core values they planted in others' minds. A toxic leader preys on fear, division, and identity crisis. An awakened leader touches compassion, truth, and the yearning to live authentically. But leadership isn't reserved for presidents or historical figures. Each of us, in our families, workplaces, social media, we are all leading others in some direction. The real question is, what are you planting? So don't just ask, who is leading me? Also ask, who am I leading? And what seeds am I sowing in their hearts? In a world full of noise, sometimes a single voice of awareness is enough to alter the course of a long chain of mistakes. Small kindness, seeds of great change. We often imagine that social change comes from grand actions, powerful voices, and revolutions that shake history. But there is another kind of change, quiet, steady, that begins with the smallest acts of kindness. A gaze that meets the eyes of someone abandoned, a fair word spoken, When someone is being misrepresented, a pause to ask, "Are you okay?" When everyone else rushes by, these may seem insignificant, but in truth, they plant the seeds of humanity in a world increasingly indifferent and cold. Social psychology calls this the moral contagion effect. When one person chooses to do what is right, even in a small way, they create space for others to do the same. A compassionate act is not just a moment, it is a signal, a reminder that empathy still exists. In a toxic environment where verbal violence or injustice becomes the norm, a kind person becomes the most precious form of resistance. And that person doesn't need a title or applause. They simply need the strength to live rightly, even when no one notices. So don't underestimate what you do. Don't think you're too small to make a difference. The kindness you choose today may be the only thing keeping someone's faith in humanity alive. And perhaps, one day, that tiny act will save a soul from falling into darkness. When you fall, don't forget to forgive yourself. None of us is immune to mistakes. No matter how strong your mind or how firm your morals, there will be moments when you falter, hurt others, or betray values you once held dear. In those moments, the key is not to avoid or excuse, but to dare to look back and learn how to forgive yourself. Many people live their entire lives in regret. They carry the weight of a wrong choice, a moment of weakness, and slowly lose faith in themselves. But you are not your worst version. You are a living, flowing stream, and in that current, there is space for failure, but also for thought recovery. Forgiving yourself doesn't mean forgetting your mistakes. On the contrary, it requires the courage to look straight at what you've done, to acknowledge it with honesty and pain, and from there, commit to moving forward with a more awakened self. The journey of healing begins with truth. When you can say, "I was wrong," you're also saying, "I can be right again." Forgiveness is how you break the cycle of self-destruction and create space for growth to emerge from the cracks. And remember, only those who learn to forgive themselves can truly empathize with others. True compassion doesn't come from perfection. It comes from authentic living, which includes failure, regret, and the ability to rise again with a more open heart. The line between good and evil lies not in others, but in you. We often divide the world into two camps, good people and bad people, but the truth is always more complex than these labels. The boundary between good and evil isn't a line separating groups, it's a thin thread that runs through every human heart. The famous words of Alexander Solzhenitsyn reveal a truth we cannot escape. Anyone can become a person who harms or one who uplifts, depending on the choices they make in decisive moments. You are not evil just because you feel anger, nor are you good simply because you haven't done wrong every day. Through how you react, how you stay silent or speak up, how you choose empathy or judgment, you are shaping that boundary. And the frightening part is, falling out of light doesn't come from grand decisions, but from countless unnoticed moments. So the question is no longer who is good, but which part of myself am I feeding each day? When you ignore others' pain, you let the dark speak. When you choose forgiveness, even while wounded, you relight the flame. Living mindfully means knowing that both darkness and light live within you. And every action, even the smallest, is tipping that scale. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to, every day, move closer to the part of yourself that is wise, kind, and brave. That is how you stay yourself, even when the world around you loses its way. Pain is not the enemy. It is the door back to your true self. We fear pain. We fear feeling weak, being betrayed, or facing the wounds within us. But what few will tell you is, pain doesn't just break, it opens. Pain when listened to, can become a mirror reflecting your true self. It reminds you that something in your life has drifted from your core values, that something remains unhealed, that part of you is yearning to come home. Pain slows you down, makes you ask questions, and leads you inward, not to escape the world but to rebuild from a stronger foundation, because sometimes you don't truly find yourself until you've lost your former identity. Stop treating pain as the enemy. Let it become your guide. Some lessons cannot be learned by logic, only by a heart cracked wide, enough for light to enter. True strength is keeping inner peace in the storm. In this chaotic world, we often mistake strength for the loudest voice, for winning arguments, for forcing others to agree. But true strength is often silent. It's when you're misunderstood and don't rush to defend yourself, because you understand the value of timely silence. It's when others choose anger and you choose calm, when you don't let others' emotions dictate your inner state. That is inner power. Staying at peace in a storm doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means you feel everything, but you are not swept away. It's standing still amid pressure, opposition, and turbulence, yet remembering who you are and still acting from truth. That kind of strength doesn't come from outer armor. It comes from having walked through pain, having fallen before, having learned to rise without losing the softness in your heart. And when you can do that, you not only protect yourself, you become a source of calm for others caught in their own storms. Every day is a choice. What are you planting in this world? You don't need to wait for a grand moment to change the world every day. You're already making a difference through how you live, how you speak, how you treat those around you. The question is, what are you planting? You can plant patience when others lose control. You can plant presence when someone feels hopeless. You can plant honesty, even when others choose pretense. These small things are seeds of light in a world filled with shadows. And you, each morning when you wake, get to decide what you will live by. Will it be fear or faith, indifference or compassion, ego or connection? You don't need to be perfect. Just be honest with yourself, brave when needed, and kind whenever possible. That is how you protect the best part of yourself and quietly make this world a little more livable every single day. We cannot control every circumstance. We cannot ensure we'll always be right, but we always hold one quiet power, the power to choose again every day, to choose awareness, to choose to stay human, to choose to be a person even when the world forgets what that means. And perhaps that choice is what truly defines who you are.